Ladies, gentlemen, over the past 3 years, COVID, I got really fat. Or at least for me, really fat. Before that, even the past 9 or 10 years, I let myself get a little chunky. And it was a slow and steady decline into a state that wasn't particularly good for me in terms of performance or health. I recently dug myself back out of that, and I'm going to share with you how I did it. So if you're interested, stick around. Before I even begin, let me just say that none of what I'm going to tell you is advice to anybody, and certainly not to you. I am not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a personal trainer. I'm none of those things. What I am is somebody who's just trying to pry fat off my frame and turn me into something that is going to be more useful moving forward and gives me better quality of life, both personally and professionally. That is it. I got to give you some backstory. About 20 years ago, I was in pretty good shape. Probably really good shape by a lot of people's standards. Before that, I had gotten pretty chunky, but then I decided to really button down, get on a really clean diet. I was training really hard, probably somewhere between 10 and 14 hours a week of like weightlifting, martial arts, everything else. I was eating a really clean diet, like either ketogenic or paleo or Atkins, whatever you want to call it, but really limited carbs, really high protein. And my body fat percentage, like, while at one point I got it into the single digits, didn't stay there. But I think I hit like right around 190. And at 190, I was about between 11 and 12% body fat. And I felt really good there, felt really strong. I was like, hey, I could keep this forever and ever. Like, I could maintain this. I said that. And I wish I hadn't said it because I couldn't, right? Like, life, everything just kind of conspired. But like I said at the time, man, I was feeling it. But that fateful statement, well, you know what Maury says.
Well, the lie detector test determined that was a lie.
Anyway, I go to the police academy. I'm in still pretty good shape. Like, I'm not in bad shape at that point. And I think when I graduated the police academy, I was probably in the high 190s, kind of knocking on 200. And then at various points I fluctuated around, but pretty quickly within 2 or 3 years, I was really closer to 210, 214 in terms of body weight. And my body fat percentage, that wasn't muscle, that was fat. And I was getting more and more sporadic in my workouts until finally I was like, man, I got to change this. And I remember going to a CrossFit gym and doing some CrossFit, and I gave myself a stunning case of rhabdomyolysis. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. I don't even want to go into it, but it is dangerous. It can kill you if it's untreated, actually. And that put me in the hospital for 4 days. And I remember at the time feeling like crap, and it was kind of awful. When you Google rhabdomyolysis, by the way, you're going to see a lot of CrossFit references. There's probably a reason for that. It doesn't really matter. It's not germane. But like I said, about 214, and I spent the vast majority of my career when I was doing patrol for Metro, probably walking around between 210 and 214. Every now and again, I diet down a little bit and maybe get to like 205, but I never maintained it. I never stayed there. Every time my weight would just creep back up. And even once I left Metro and I started doing instruction full time, I was probably still around that range. It kind of fluctuated, 214, 218. Not skinny by any stretch of the imagination. And probably, I don't know, at this point we're talking like high 20s, low 30s when it comes to body fat percentage. The opportunities to work out were certainly there. Like, you know, I'm fortunate in that at work I can work out. But my workouts kept getting like less and less. My diet kept getting crappier and crappier. Then if we fast forward, we hit COVID. When COVID hit, the world shut down, and I took that as kind of an invitation to put everything in my mouth. Crack all the jokes you want. Extra helpings, junk food, desserts, booze, and all the time. It wasn't like an occasional thing like, hey, on the weekend, you know, I might have a really nice meal and have a couple glasses of wine or a couple cocktails. We're talking like every night I'd eat a big plate, have a second big plate, have some dessert, and wash that whole thing down with 1 or 2 alcoholic beverages. And over time, it just really started adding up. And back to the physical activity thing, that really kind of didn't happen. really, really sporadic and really, really crappy workouts. Not that you can outrun a fork anyway, but it was getting worse and worse. And medically, I really started having high cholesterol, even as much as back when I was walking around at 210, 214. And the doctor was like, hey, you should get on a statin. You should get on a statin. Every time I'd get a checkup, he's like, hey, you should get on a statin. And I kind of refused. But the cholesterol level, it just kept getting worse, kept getting worse. And at one point, the doctor said, hey, why don't you get a cardio CT scoring, where they actually look at the calcium or the calcification around the arteries around your heart. And that gives you an idea of if there's a lot of buildup there or not. As a 50-year-old male, that number should be 0. But when I had calcium scoring done, it was 88. And the doctor's like, hey, there's buildups there, so you should get on a statin. And so I agreed. I said, hey, go ahead, put me on a statin. The first one they put me on, I think, was Lipitor, and Lipitor made me feel weird. I forget what the actual name or the real drug name is, but the Lipitor is the commercial name for it. That made me feel weird. I told the doctor I couldn't keep taking that. So then he switched me to Crestor, and that at its lowest dose seemed pretty tolerable. So on I went. Like I said, back to the COVID time though. I'm still gaining weight. It's not getting any better. Really, it's actually continues to slide. The doctor says, hey, the amount of Crestor you're on is not controlling your cholesterol enough. So we're going to have to move you up a dose. So they did. They doubled my dose of Crestor. And I wasn't really changing any of my diets or any of my habits. And even as we were coming out of COVID a little bit, like I just didn't really care. I just kept kind of eating the same way. I built this habit and I kept that habit, because once you get in a habit, it's easy to just keep doing it. So I did. Now, I didn't feel any better. I didn't change my diet, and it just kept getting like crap. I went on a trip, and while I was on that trip, I'm walking around at probably 228 pounds. Probably the heaviest I've ever been. And look, I realize there are people who are weighing much more. There are people who have never got up to my weight. But 228 for me was pretty heavy. I was pretty sluggish, no energy, just a general malaise, if you will. And on that trip, walking around at 228, I started to have chest pains. And not like a little ache like I did too many push-ups or too much bench press, like real, like, am I gonna die kind of pain? And it was concerning. Came back from the trip immediately, went to the ER. They did a full workup, like everything. And they were like, hey, there's nothing emergent. We don't see any cardiac enzymes indicating that there's any heart distress. The EKG was reasonably normal. My cholesterol, all my blood numbers, they were okay. Obviously aside from the fact that everything was really goofy. I should also mention, by the way, that I had slid into pre-diabetes in terms of A1C numbers. I remember when the doctor told me that, it was with this clinical detachment. He's like, hey, did you know you're pre-diabetic? And I was like, no. And he didn't even really go into it. It's just, that's where I was. I think he's so used to people just being shit with their choices and shit with their health that he just sits there and kind of records on the chart and watches you slide off into oblivion, which is kind of where I was headed. So anyways, I leave the hospital back from my heart attack scare. I go and see a cardiologist within like a day or two, and she sets me up for a whole battery of tests. Super awesome. I'd recommend her to anybody. She gets me a CT cardiac angiogram, which is supposedly better even than a catheterization in terms of being able to see what's going on inside your heart. I did that and it came back, I believe, unremarkable was what they said. So there was nothing wrong. They found nothing. A few other tests, some other things, and kind of bewildered. Like, what is the problem? I do a little bit of Googling and I find that there's another guy who's in the same age range as me who was taking Crestor and experienced the same symptoms. Like, I think I'm having a heart attack. And once again, nothing found, and they determined that the statin was making him feel that way. So I call my doctor immediately. I'm like, hey, I think this is a thing. Can we switch statins? And so she does. In fact, she finds one that is the least likely to cause musculoskeletal aches and pains. It puts me on that one along in conjunction with another cholesterol lowering medication. And my symptoms subside. They go away. Here's the problem. I have done really nothing about my health. I'm just safe for now. In January, I decided to try and change things. And I got on some intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting works really, really well for some people, but guys, it really wasn't working for me. I found it really kind of difficult. And I think that probably me letting my gastrointestinal hormones get so wonky and becoming probably very insulin resistant over those years of just eating crap really made it hard to do intermittent fasting. So I'm not saying it wouldn't work for you, but it really didn't work for me. I did drop about 4 pounds. So I went from 228 to 224. Probably not going to be enough. I remember my cardiologist saying, hey, you shouldn't be walking around in the high 220s. You should be walking around 200. He's like, why don't you dump 25 pounds, and if you can do that, and you can go live a healthy life, and I think that'll be good. And those words kind of echoed in my mind. So I went and I got prescribed a drug to reduce my appetite. If you're not familiar with any peptide-based drugs, they are kind of all the rage when it comes to appetite control. Things like Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, Mounjaro, and there are probably others. And I suspect there are more and more going to be coming out every day because the drug companies, I think, have realized the efficacy of them, and there's a huge market for it. Obviously, if you're betting on America becoming older and fatter, you're going to win every time. And so those, I think, drug companies realize that probably even more than boner pills, fat drugs are probably going to make them a lot of money. And if the pandemic has proven anything, pharmaceutical companies like making money. That's a digression. Anyway, so I get put on a starter dose of Mounjaro, and it very quickly allows me to kind of control my appetite. It doesn't like make the world better, but it kind of calms me down in terms of eating. Normally, before I started doing that drug, I would not graze. It's not like I was eating snacks all day, but when I hit mealtime, I would just eat. And the shut off, like it didn't exist. It just kept going, like another plate, some dessert, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I'd eat until I was really uncomfortably full. And that was my MO. Every meal, every night. Lunches, sometimes breakfasts, not usually, but definitely for dinner, I would just crush a ton of calories. Probably, in excess of 1,000 plus calories, and maybe even double that every night. It's got to go somewhere, right? It's not just going to disappear into thin air. But that Mounjaro, it helped me kind of control it. I won't really go into any of those drugs in depth. They have their own pluses and minuses. If you're interested in any of that, there's a ton of research you can do. I will throw some links down in the description, but for the most part, guys, if you're curious about those things, there's so much information out there. I stayed on a starter dose of Mounjaro for about 2 months. And I'm talking like 2.5 milligrams, like a dose that they don't even use to doing studies for weight loss. It's like the dose they start you with to kind of ease you up to a bigger dose to get you where you can losing weight. But for 2 months, that seemed to work. And I plateaued a little, and I just recently in the past 2 weeks moved up to the 5 milligram. And I think that may be enough. I don't think I'm going to need any more. But back to the drug, it doesn't change your diet. You have to change your diet, right? And so that's what I did. I went to smaller portions, no seconds, no desserts during the week. I'll still have some of that every now and again on the weekend, but I really tried to be really strict about portions and limiting everything to about 500 calories a meal. And if you do that 3 times, 1,500 calories for a guy in my body weight class is definitely below basal metabolic rate or BMR. So 300 to 500 calorie deficit every day, that's going to be weight loss. Like it's just going to. It doesn't seem to move in a perfectly straight line, and I can post a screenshot of the graph that my weight was. You see sometimes it really moves down, sometimes it goes back up a little bit, sometimes I plateau, but the overall trend has obviously been weight loss. Also, when it comes to alcohol, I weigh myself every day, and it became pretty apparent pretty rapidly that with alcohol, either I could drink alcohol or I could burn fat on any given day, but I can't do both. I think the liver really, it does one or the other. So I really kind of limited my alcohol consumption to the weekends again, and like instead of a lot, 1 to 2 drinks. Now, I'm sure if you've ever gone to a party with me, you've seen me drink more than that more recently. I'm not perfect, not a saint, but in general, that's kind of my strategy, is trying to stay with limited alcohol consumption. I enjoy it, but I don't want to enjoy it like gallons at a time. So that's really it for the food, really it for the alcohol, with some exceptions. Because once I dropped about 15 pounds, I noticed that I was losing muscle. And that could be a side effect of just the caloric deficit. It could also be a side effect of that drug, because supposedly one of the side effects of that drug is, while you're losing weight, losing a little more muscle than you would otherwise. So that scared me a little bit. So I started lifting again and trying to lift heavy, like the stuff that'll build muscle. And I upped my protein consumption, either ready to drink, like the bottles of Fairlife, or protein powders, and focusing on meats rather than other things. That protein consumption really seemed to help. And with the weight training, the muscle loss stopped, which was good because, like I said, it was scaring me pretty badly. In addition to that, I started taking some supplements: NMN, creatine, a testosterone booster, and berberine. Each one of those supplements could probably get their own video or videos. And so if you want to do research on those, same thing, I'll let you go. But each one of those either contributes to energy, lean body mass, or blood sugar control. And those things are the things that really seem to matter when it comes to losing weight. In general, I got to say, with creatine, I'd recommend that to almost anybody. It's probably the most researched supplement on the planet at this point. The side effects are almost negligible as long as you don't take like hyperdoses of it. I just took 5 grams a day. I didn't bother with any loading or anything like that. I very much recommend creatine. I like the others that I'm taking as well. Really about the only thing that I'm wondering about now is my testosterone levels. As an adult male of increasing years, testosterone levels normally fall. The last time I got mine checked, they had come up some, but they still weren't great. And I'm not really opposed to taking tests, like getting on a testosterone replacement. I'm not. I know that you're probably thinking, well, crap, Jay, you're going to be on these drugs for the rest of your life. I was already going to be on drugs for the rest of my life. Statins at a minimum, probably some blood pressure meds. We get a little further down the road, all kinds of other things like blood thinners. I start having real problems. If I had continued to gain weight and continued to not exercise, that trajectory is pretty bad. In my family, people either die in their 50s or they die when they're 90. There are very few people who made it to anywhere in the middle. And I was really starting to look in the mirror and see the relatives who were dying in their 50s looking back at me. And so I had to do something. So at my age, thinking, oh, I'm going to be on this drug for the rest of my life or whatever, I don't know that I care. If I were 25 and looking at this, I might have a different opinion. I don't know. I really don't know. The long-term side effects of peptide-based drugs is still unknown. A lot of these drugs are really, really new. There are supposedly a lot of health benefits, including cognition and cardiac, as well as losing weight. So from my perspective, at least right now, they're not bad. Like I said, if you're interested, please talk to your doctor. Like I'm not a medical professional. I would never tell you to use a drug or get on a drug. That's really, really up to you. But for me, it's made a real difference. As I'm standing here talking to you guys, I legitimately just popped out of obese on the BMI scale, and now I'm just into overweight. My BMI was 29.8 when last I checked it. I'm currently standing here at 196 pounds. My blood pressure is now 115/72 last time I checked. My A1C numbers, the ones that tell you if you're in the diabetic range, are now back out of pre-diabetes and into normal. Triglycerides, cholesterol, all those things have come down. In fact, my cholesterol numbers last time was like 108, and the doctor already pulled me off of one of those 2 cholesterol meds. We'll see in 5 or 6 months. Maybe I'll just get off cholesterol meds altogether, but we'll see. I don't know that I really care about taking a little teeny dose of something if it's gonna not have any weird side effects and there's no negatives, I don't know that I care. Obviously at this point, who cares? So, my medicine cabinet does look a little bit like your grandparents', a little less than it did. Oh, and I forgot to mention I eat vitamin D like Skittles, about 4,000 IU a day. So really, about the only thing left to talk about, I think, is the downsides. There are downsides of losing weight, believe it or not. The first one is I'm cold. I am cold a lot now. I'm glad it's moving into summer. I basically walk around chilly all the time. In the office, I'm almost always wearing an additional layer. I get made fun of about that, but I'm friggin' cold. Secondly, none of my clothes are fitting now. I already sold off one pair of pants to a friend, but I don't think I'm going to eBay my entire wardrobe. I am fortunate in that work issues me pants, so I managed to get some smaller pants at work, but overall, the clothing situation is kind of wild. Hopefully I can stabilize and stay there. Lastly, I'm getting really close to a weight that I'm thinking is going to be my goal weight. Like, I think I'd like to weigh 188 pounds. I don't have the same musculature that I had when I hit that 190 at 12% body fat. So I'm thinking I probably want to be a little lighter. Hopefully I can muscle up a little bit in the meantime. But in general, that's kind of where I want to end up, I think. When I get there, I'll take another look. I may get crazy and go get a DEXA scan and see what my real actual body fat percentage is, bone density, all that stuff. I think I'd just like to know. Sometimes it's just nicer to know than not know. I think maintenance might be hard. I have no idea what that looks like. I have spent the past almost 18 years just getting fatter. And now I'm in weight loss mode, so now I'm getting skinnier, and that I think I've got a plan for. And I can make that work now. But I don't know how to just stay at a spot. And that might be the biggest challenge of all. So with all that said, guys, I'm not going to make this video any longer. I talked a lot. I don't know if any of this has been interesting or informative to you. And I'm going to reiterate, guys, if you're interested in doing any of the things that I talked about, please talk to a real knowledgeable individual or individuals. Do a lot of Googling, do a lot of research. See if it makes sense for you. I know that in the gun community, it's really, really easy to be fat. Like the fat old gun guy trope, it happens. And I'm not throwing stones because I really am one, slightly reformed, fat old gun guy. But I wanted to be a little less fat. Personally, professionally, all those reasons, a lot more. It just makes sense for me to be leaner in terms of pure performance. And so, I'm not any younger than I was before. I'd rather stack the deck in my favor as I age than stack it against. Oh, and I did forget one more downside. My Ronin Tactics belt, if I get any skinnier, I'm going to have to buy another belt. Those things are not cheap. So, I don't know. I kind of like that Ronin belt. Some people don't, and I know there's a lot of new hotness out there, but I like my Ronin belt. That's all I got, guys. If you want to see if I continue to get skinnier or if I swell up again, make sure you subscribe so you can have a ringside seat to the show. I'm hoping for the best, but I never discount the fact that I can sabotage myself probably better than anybody on the planet. If any of these things really, really interest you, if this video gets any traction at all and people want videos about me breaking out any of these things, like what I eat or anything about those drugs or anything about those supplements, let me know. I can do another video. But like I said, the people who come to this channel usually want to see knife stuff or gun stuff. I may just curtail it to this one video. Like I said, unless you guys say you want something different. Take care. Stay safe. I'll talk to you soon.
Get 'em, Jay.